Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
In sports, the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story, but Netflix does. Stories about dads who happen to be world-class quarterbacks and a battle for the heart, soul, and direction of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're brand new, Netflix has the stories for every type of fan. You can watch these incredible sports stories like Quarterback, F1 Drive to Survive, Untold, and many more now on Netflix.
Need a holiday gift that will keep her sparkling all year long? Right now, Blue Nile, the original online jeweler, is offering 30% off select jewelry. With experts on hand 24/7 to provide guidance, you're sure to find the perfect piece. And now there's even more to love about shopping at BlueNile.com. For a limited time, get 36-month special financing on minimum purchases of $1,000. Restrictions apply. See BlueNile.com for details. That's BlueNile.com.
Serie A Chronicles is a Serie A Chronicles production.
Ciao ragazzi, how is everyone? Welcome to our last Serie A Chronicles podcast of 2021. We held this one back to get in the last final round of the year, the final round of Serie A fixtures. And unfortunately, in those extra few days that we've held back, my poor co-host, Mina has got a little bit sick. She's currently waiting for a result of a COVID test. I got to tell you, for those of you listening, because I'm seeing her on a web chat right now, so we're not at risk of contaminating each other, but she looks remarkably well put together for being sick. I don't think I would be anywhere near as glowing if I was feeling unwell. But I think, Mina, you sound like you maybe aren't feeling quite on top of the world today.
No, but I mean, secretly, I think I got sick because I wanted you to be able to say COVID test, not COVID.
COVID.
So it's just this grand plan. It's a grand plan, in which I could listen to you say that word hopefully a few times during the podcast and get a few laughs from everyone around. Even if it means I have to quarantine at Christmas.
I can't even tell which one I use anymore. I think I just swap between COVID and COVID without even noticing. But you always remind me.
Oh, it really does make me laugh. It totally makes my day. So I feel a bit better now.
Anything we can do to help. And everyone who's listening to this, you need to send lovely messages to Mina to make her feel better as well. There.
Yes, exactly.
Everyone needs to wish her well and send that positive vibes from wherever you are in the world to get Mina better for Christmas.
To the witch of Serie A. Hope you feel better.
As if. Mina, despite being sick, have you been able to watch the glut of Christmas Serie A football that we've had?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's been a lot, right? I think that I've had a bit of cabin fever. Yeah, I kind of just feel like all I do is watch games now, and I've started to feel like I don't do anything else. So there's been like a lot of games, and obviously some of them have been shocking to say the least. My betting has been, I do place a few bets sometimes just to entertain myself in games that I usually wouldn't be entertained. They're very small amounts. And it's just been really like, for me, as soon as Spezia scored a goal against Napoli, I was like, all right, I'm out. Like, I just completely this is the most ridiculous, Serie A season ever. The only thing that makes me feel safe, frankly speaking, are Inter. It's just the only team I trust to put it together. And I guess, as a Juve fan, it's like, I'm very risk averse in general in life. Like, I'm a saver. I'm one of those people that just I'm just somebody who likes knowing everything in advance and planning and all of this business. So I think that's kind of why I'm a Juve fan, because I trust the team to usually get their act together, And now I'm like, oh, wow, like Inter's the team I trust. Like Inter's the team that makes me feel like, yeah, I know they're going to have this. They're going to have this. So should we start off with them because they are winter champions? And it's been 17 goals, none conceded in their last 6 games in a row. So basically ever since they've played Napoli, in which that was like a great game, it's kind of just been, Inter all the way. And Calhanoglu, ever since the Milan derby, is like the man. Well, I also wanted to ask you if you were surprised he was going to play, considering he was on a yellow card, and this would mean he'd be suspended for the game against Bologna when everyone comes back after Christmas break.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things you just said, Mina. Like, I love the idea that Juventus are just the club to support. Like, if you're risk averse, if you're because people ask me. In fact, I had a friend, a lovely friend of mine. I don't know if she'll be listening, but Connie, if you're listening, thank you so much, because she is not a big football fan. Came new to the podcast because she wanted to hear the podcast I did. Very enthusiastic about us. Thank you, Collie. And she was asking me who she should support. Yeah. She was like, who should my team be? And I always say to people, whenever people out who are entering any of the sports leagues that I cover ask about, what's the team for me? I say, well, if it's not where you live, ask yourself where you'd like to go on holiday, frankly, because that's a good reason. Because then you've got a good reason to go on holiday and watch that team. And I actually quite like Turin. I think Turin's quite a nice sort of, very navigable city that's got sort of a certain modern youthfulness to it in some places now, but it's not a place I'd recommend to people to go on a holiday. But maybe I need to save Juventus now for people who are just planners who just want to know exactly what's happening. Because probably, yes, it's a good place. It's a good place for that. I so agree with you about
Wait,
Inter.
I thought you told everyone to support Atalanta. I don't know why.
I tell everyone to watch Atalanta. I tell everyone to watch Atalanta. I don't tell people who to support, but who to watch.
I see. I see.
I mean, these 2 games, these 2 rounds of games, they were so close together, and they've just put my head for a spin, frankly, Mina, because there's so many sort of contradicting results from teams in the space of 3 days. You went from Napoli, who you mentioned, beat Milan. You think, well, it was not like a thrilling game, but I thought they were the better team. It's a good result. This is the anti-Inter now. That's their position.
Yeah.
And then they go and lose to Spezia. And they weren't even fighting by the end of it. I thought it was an awful game. Milan, on the other hand, lose that game against Napoli, come back and actually play really well against Empoli. Roma produced the best sort of win of Jose Mourinho's time by a mile against Atalanta. And I thought they were great value for it, even though the sort of the possession stats might look like they weren't. I thought they were really good in that game, Roma. And then terrible and boring draw with Sampdoria, in which Jose Mourinho says, I would have changed channel if I was watching. And the only team that make any sense in this week, as you said, it's Inter, because they just win. It's just what Inter do now. They win. They've won 7 games in a row. I think they've won 9 out of the last 11, with the 2 being draws. They've basically, since that Lazio game, they've just been completely consistent. They've been scoring goals at a crazy rate, 49 goals in this Serie A season. They've got the most points they've had at this point of a Serie A season ever, except for in the 2 years under Roberto Mancini, right after Calciopoli, when they basically didn't have any competition. And what's sort of amazing to me, and you mentioned Calhanoglu, and for sure, his sort of integration, the way that team has been redesigned around him is huge. But actually, I think what stood out to me in this last round was, we've talked about squad depth with them before, but suddenly you're seeing Alexis Sanchez is on the pitch and doing things. You're seeing Arturo Vidal starting a game. You're seeing Dumfries sort of producing some of his better football in an Inter shirt. It's that reminder again. And perhaps this is, by the way, the real reason that everyone else is so inconsistent this time of year, is that everyone else is cream crackered. They're all completely out on their feet. And Inter can just turn around and say, yep, more depth. But even if that is what's the case, I say we can still doff our hats to Simone Inzaghi, because frankly, Conte was very, very good with his massive squad when he was there, but turning around and going, look, I have no options whatsoever. I don't have any sort of options. And what am I supposed to do? Bring off the bench. And, you know, Inzaghi is going the opposite direction completely and making this really big squad feel, I think, very involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you mentioned, they have 1 point more than at this point of the season than Inter that won the treble. I mean, they have 5 points more than where they were last season. And they do, I think Bastoni actually is the one who did an interview recently, and I sort of chuckled to myself because I always look for these types of interviews. And he said, I just think that we have unpredictability this season. And I think what's interesting is that I remember when Barcelona had won the treble under Pep Guardiola, and the next season in the summer, he had asked for lots and lots of reinforcements because generally sometimes what you get is motivation wanes. You know, I mean, Pogba spoke about it after the World Cup. It's just like, it's hard to just gear yourself up and keep trying, which is why I feel like also with Juventus, 9 in a row, there comes a point, you know, when you're tired of fighting all the time, you know. But what I think is so interesting is that what happens is you change the motivations, like, you know, and what they did is it's a really fun game for them. They seem to really be enjoying what they're doing. And I feel like that makes the overall difference. And it's interesting because when I watch Napoli, it's like they've always got to be like a warrior side team to try to secure the result. Milan are always having to work so hard to try to cover up sometimes the fact that they are young. They can be naive, they do make individual mistakes, and they don't have necessarily the squad depth and a lot of injuries, right? Mm-hmm. But what's interesting about Inter is that they could just smash Salernitana 5-0 and then face the Torino side that is much, much better than they were last season. They have 11 points and more this year than where they were last year. They are a strong team. They don't necessarily score goals, and they are missing Belotti, and they are terrible away from home. But they're not an easy side to play. And frankly, Inter didn't even need to get out of second gear. They were like, you know what, we'll get the goal to secure the win, and we're out. 17 goals, just complete domination. So many clean sheets. You just feel that it's a side that is so well balanced. I think that's the key. I think it's the balance that I am so in awe of, you know? And what I loved about this is that Euro chose to play a midfield that would usually traditionally, like, you know, and it stopped Inter from really being able to recover and play with the kind of fluidity that they usually play with. Because it was like, you know, pressing and good pressing, and they kept their center of gravity high up the pitch. But it's just like Inter have a solution for practically everything. And at this point, I really hope that they can be the flag of Serie A when it comes to the Champions League. And I know it's a really horrible matchup, and they do play Liverpool, but they are a side that just fills me with this safe knowledge of everything that they do. I'm never scared. I'm never scared they're going to concede. I'm always sure they're going to score goals. And they genuinely seem really happy.
Everyone's making you feel safe at the moment, Mina. They're taking over your Juventus role of making you feel safe. It was funny, actually, because I was just thinking, as you were having that sort of thought, I was having the sort of, I guess that the idea in my head again, which we talked about it so much when Conte was there, that he was trying to sort of hammer the pats out of Inter. But if Juventus were the team you're supposed to tell people to support if they like knowing what's what and stability, Inter have always been the opposite. They have been Pazza Inter. They're the team that, sorry, Ross is having a say because someone's coming through the door next door.
He's such a protective dog.
He is.
He makes you feel safe. He's like Inter for me.
Some of the time he's just annoying when I'm trying to do a show. Oh no, he's a good dog. He's a really good dog. You're a sweetheart, really. Right. Yes, you know, Inter's club anthem literally asks you to love them even though they're crazy or because they're crazy almost. And of course, Conte banned that from being played. But they sort of went through a phase, I felt like earlier in this season, where they were re-embracing the crazy, when they were being a bit sort of winning games, but in a slightly chaotic way. They were scoring lots of goals, they were conceding lots of goals. As you just alluded to, Mina, they've actually kept 6 clean sheets in a row now. Bastoni has been, he just mentioned this, has obviously been brilliant. Skriniar, brilliant. Like the defense is such a core of the last bit. And I think you can look at this last little stretch on the calendar and slightly sort of play it down if you want to, because a lot of these have not been the toughest opponents, right? Like they've had quite a soft run in through to Christmas, other than the Inter game, the Real Madrid game, which they did lose. And I think that if there's any chance now that Inter don't win the league, it's going to be given to us pretty early in the new year, because they face, in their first 6 games back, I think they face Lazio, Juventus, Milan and Napoli. So they face really tough games in the new year very quickly, in quick succession. And perhaps when you see that calendar, oh, absolutely. But when you see that calendar and remember the fact that in Serie A, you play your opponents 1 to 19 and then you repeat, that's some indication for you right there, probably, of why Inter were a bit behind earlier in the season and then were able to pick up. So the fact that they were behind Milan and Napoli for a while, it also had to do with the fact that Milan and Napoli just weren't dropping any points. But, they did have a tougher start to the season than some other teams as well. I think in the big picture...
But it's also a different style of play. It's also that. I mean, it's also acknowledging... this is what at the time when I was coming back on Gazzetta, who were saying, this is not the time, this is not the team that we were seeing under Antonio Conte. It's yes, but they are playing with a higher center of gravity. Obviously, defensively, there are going to be a lot more mistakes that they started to really take control of after, I think, Napoli. And it was, Napoli, what happened was the mentality that they showed is what ensured their win over, obviously what I always accuse Napoli of having is one that they can't always sometimes get over the line. But a lot, I think, is the game that's changed, the unpredictability, the fact that there isn't this go-to tactic that they had under Antonio Conte. That was always going to need a little time, I think, to find its way through. And the fact is that it's a little bit do you remember when we used to say, Allegri just needs until about November and December, and then he settles on an identity and then they just go on a bender, I feel like this is what Inzaghi's done. And I had question marks about his substitutions, about, the things that he may do, because he does like to play a very different style of football to Conte. But I'm amazed at their defensive solidity, and just that it is that balance that they have secured now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think... it was an interesting point you said as well about Juventus, and sort of when you've won enough times, you sort of get that. In Italy, it's often referred to as the full belly, isn't it? Like the pancia piena, and you need someone to have a difference there. And look, I'm not here for a second to say that Lukaku had his, there's a terrible analogy given all the people that talked about him being fat, which of course he lost a bunch of weight when he was at Inter, but I don't think he would have been, if he stayed another year, short of motivation. But it's interesting that when you look at a player like Dzeko even, I feel like Dzeko could easily have sort of ridden out the end of his career. And at Roma basically felt like he was. He was still a good player. He was still doing good things. But I don't know if Dzeko ever imagined that he was going to win more trophies in his career. And now I feel like he's sort of been given this sort of tantalizing prospect angled in front of him as, you know what, you've already won stuff. You're a great footballer who's got a great career. But it doesn't have to be done just yet. It can be, you can have this last glory. And I think that sort of dynamic with individuals is always so important. And I think it's true when people sort of break it down, they'll see it's true in everybody's lives often. There are certain jobs, or it could be non-jobs, but moments in your life and challenges that come along that excite you. And you give more of yourself in those times when they happen. And I think that probably Dzeko is a good example. And I bet Çalhanoğlu as well might feel like things were great at Milan, but actually now he's landed in a team where we can really go and win a bunch of stuff. And it is exciting. Yeah. We're not doing full report cards for this season like we've done sometimes in the past, but I think this would be, if we were with Inter, a very solid A for Simone Inzaghi. I think it's been above and beyond, maybe even an A+, above and beyond what I could have expected of Inter in the first part of the season. He said after this game, everyone's talking about Inter now, like we're this inevitable dreadnought that was sweeping everyone around. No one was saying that in the summer. And he's right. No one was saying that in the summer. In fact, a lot of us, including me, were saying, Inter have sold Lukaku and Hakimi. They're probably going to come back to the pack a little bit.
I mean, I agree with you. I think it has to be that. But I also want to put some emphasis on Beppe Marotta. And I think that it's interesting because, we were talking about motivations and like you're mentioning now, players who feel like they have come to this club and have the opportunity to now win trophies, even at this age, even after all the things that they were told about Inter's potential financial problems, and it could be a transitional year. And then you just see so many of them shining, like Alexis Sanchez, like Edin Dzeko, like Perisic, who won a treble with Bayern, and it's just a terrific player to watch on the pitch, And I think that has a lot to do with something that Marotta does. And before he decides on players, he loves to analyze that sort of, why do they want to move? What are their intentions? And it was something he did with Arturo Vidal when he brought him into Juventus, something he did with Carlos Tevez. It's to see if there is a genuine desire to move, or whether they're just moving because it's a good deal. Yeah, and they can move to a club and make money. And I think that's what Juventus are missing when they lost him, and that's what Inter have gained. And that ability to, even if they're losing some of their greatest stars, and like even Eriksen that they didn't sell, but unfortunately it is what it is for a health issue, they have found different players to try to really extract that potential. And Çalhanoğlu, like right now, just looks like a player that's desperate to prove he's world class. And I think I'm interested to see if it lasts till the end of the season. But if it does, then I think he's done more in this one season for Inter than he's done possibly for Milan. But we have to obviously see how that goes. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, Nikki, they did play Salernitana 5-0. And I thought and they defeated them 5-0. But I thought this is an interesting time to bring up Salernitana and the problems that they are facing. Do you think we'll start the new year with only 19 clubs in Serie A?
I desperately hope not. Yeah, Salernitana went from walloped 5-0 by Inter, which surprised nobody. We've talked about it before, that they're sort of well behind everyone in terms of quality in Serie A. But their next game against Udinese ended up getting completely abandoned because they were told by the local health authority not to leave Salerno after a couple of COVID cases. Now, there's a whole separate story to get into there about COVID and both those things, which are completely separate.
Like you're watching what you're saying. COVID.
I know, I can't help it now. I'm very self-conscious. There's a whole story to get into about that, which we'll get into. But it was this particularly odd moment because Salernitana, yes, told not to go to this game. And then in the same way as you'll remember Juventus Napoli last season, then there was a Lazio game where the same thing happened against Torino. They had this bizarre situation where the league hadn't called the game off, but the team had been hard to travel. So, of course, Udinese still had to go to the stadium. You still had to wait 45 minutes and pretend the game was going to happen. And then they finally call the whistle and it's done. But in the meantime, there was even actually about 15 or 16 Salernitana fans who had gone all the way from Salerno. Well, I don't actually know if they'd gone there from there, but certainly those 16 or so Salernitana fans with the Curva Sud banner from Salernitana who had made it to the Dacia Arena in Udine, which is about 500 miles away, by the way. So it's a serious trip if they had come from Salerno. And they brought a banner saying, "Free Salernitana," and they were there sort of singing protest songs. And the reason is that Salernitana will get thrown out of the league at the end of this month if they don't find a new buyer. Now, Salernitana are owned by Claudio Lotito, or co-owned by him, he's the majority shareholder, who also owns Lazio, as you may have noticed. Mm-hmm. He bought them as a sort of refoundation project after they went bankrupt in 2011. At the time, they were starting afresh from Serie D, and at the time, it was allowed under Italian football rules for you to own a club in Serie A and a club in Serie D, because in Italy, the professional divisions are basically the third tier upwards, which was Lega Pro, Serie B, and Serie A. Now, they got promoted immediately to Lega Pro, at which point in 2012, they had to make a special exemption for them. I say they had to, they didn't have to. They could have said, no, you can't own two football clubs, stop doing this. But they did make a special exemption for Claudio Lotito. And this has then persisted for the whole decade up until they got promoted to Serie A, at which point finally the federation turns around and says, you really can't own two teams in the same division. And what was allowed to stop them from sort of being barred from coming into Serie A, because they haven't been for 23 years, they did earn promotion on the pitch. What was allowed was basically the club had to get put into a blind trust, so sort of out of Lotito's immediate management and ownership. And with the stipulation that they had to find a buyer by the 31st of December. So they had to find a buyer by the end of this year so that Lotito could fully divest himself of it, no longer his club, and they can operate as a separate entity. Now, this hasn't happened so far. we're recording on the 23rd of December. It's possible that by the time you hear this, something would have happened and a owner would have come along. There are some sort of consortiums being talked up, some local businessmen who've been talking about it together. It's something that is under discussion. There's also this sort of insinuation that's going around from some people that maybe Lotito could have sold them by now if he was not holding out for a certain price or certain terms. Speculation. But I find the whole situation so ridiculous because you have the Italian Football Federation president, Gravina, who is saying in interviews, well, everyone saw this coming. And you're thinking, you were president of the Italian Football Federation. And in your own words, this exemption was extended for 10 years. Now, to sort of put this into context, yes, there's no immediate conflict of interest between Lazio and Salernitana when Salernitana are in Lega Pro or Serie B, but they both compete in the Coppa Italia. So when they were making the Coppa Italia, they were putting them on opposite sides of the draw to make sure they wouldn't play each other as long as they didn't reach the final. Now, again, realistically, you can say it's unlikely, right? It's unlikely and it didn't happen that Lazio and Salernitana reach a final. But how can you run a competition on that premise? How can you run a competition on the premise that it probably won't happen? It's crazy to me that it's got this far. Crazy.
Well, Serie A clubs obviously voted on the issue, and all of them would like Salernitana to get the decision postponed so that they can finish out the season in Serie A. Mm-hmm. They are likely to obviously be demoted because they are at the bottom of the heap and terrible, frankly speaking.
But Gravina has said that won't happen. He has said for now it won't happen.
He has said obviously we can overrule that, and basically what he's saying is the rules are the rules, and until the 31st of December, I'm with the Salernitana fans, and I really hope they find a solution to this. But my feeling is that this is more cheap talk, and this is what I feel like, with Italy as well. I mean, we talked about, that we started off this conversation talking about the fact that Salerno wouldn't let the team travel up and play Udinese. And it is that kind of, well, then you set a precedent when you allowed Napoli to basically replay that match when you could have shown us the value or the strength of the COVID protocol set by Serie A. But they didn't. And they decided to say that ASL, your local health authorities, can really, veto and decide whether or not a team travels up, even if it is 1, 2, or only 3 players absent. And Udinese are obviously rightfully annoyed because they had to play a match without 7 of their players at the time. And so this is why at the time I was really angry when Napoli were allowed to replay that match. And now, obviously, this is what I'm saying in Italy. It's like people still find loopholes, and then they sometimes stick to certain rules. Sometimes they don't stick to certain rules. But genuinely speaking, between you and me, do you really think that if they don't find a buyer by the 31st, they genuinely will be knocked out of the competition?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. I don't know, Mina. And I think, when you've got a situation like this, when you've had someone who's been granted an exemption for 10 years, you do wonder if it's their
fault that they've allowed it to reach this stage. Their fault,
Of course. And the Federation's fault because they weren't in Serie A for a long time. But
Federation, you're right.
It's ridiculous. There is a question we had actually on this from Daniel Rodriguez in Waterford, Connecticut, who asks why it's only Salernitana at risk of expulsion and not Lazio. The simple reason is because that's the choice made by Lotito. He did not put Lazio into a blind trust, and he wouldn't because they're his main club. Effectively he's given up Salernitana already. But look, having said that, he's given them up. But I can't imagine that he's going to go quietly if they suddenly get sort of thrown out the league and his asset has got no value anymore. So no, I expect there'll be a big war over it if it comes to that. And it will be bad news for everyone, frankly. It's probably worth talking about as well, just like the state of play with the COVID situation, because now you've got a situation where I think Serie A really felt like for quite a long time this year, they were cautiously optimistic they were out of the woods with this stuff. Serie A has the highest vaccination rate of any of the top 5 leagues in Europe. They're at 98%, or at least that's what's been reported up by La Repubblica.
I guess I just said it's only 92%, so I wonder which one is correct.
Interesting. Interesting, contradicting information.
Exactly.
But in any case, there have been really few cases this season. There's been about 19 cases, I think, and literally half of clubs haven't even had one case. But now we're suddenly like, oh, wait, this can happen again. The local health authorities can get involved again. How is this going to affect the season going forward? It's a scary moment for Serie A on that front, and probably a very welcome time to have the winter break. But I don't think a winter break that lasts until the 6th of January is going to see us through the current Omicron wave in Italy and in Europe. So I think it's going to be a complicated issue continuing going forward for sure.
Maybe that's why they played 19 games already, so that they'd have room to maneuver and cancel Coppa Italia. I don't know. Be interesting to see what they do decide to do, and hopefully they can control the wave. But we spoke about Inter, we spoke about Salernitana, and we spoke about risk-averse things. I mean, Salernitana are literally your nightmare. One thing I do want to mention, though, actually, about Salernitana was in response, because this ties nicely with Juventus. There was a question last week about whether or not, why the defense was shoddy and whether or not Allegri just rode a great defense that Conte had put into place at Juventus. And I was talking about midfield. And it's interesting because I feel like this last few games in these two rounds have really shown you what a midfield can do from every point of view, defensive, not defensive. I mean, you saw the strength of that with, the Torino and what they did against Inter and trying to disturb that middle area. And I think what's interesting, Salernitana put up, 5 players at the back, 3 in midfield, tried to do everything. But because their midfield was so wrong in terms of positioning, they were so easy to, and obviously the quality of the players is not very high, but even when they wanted to close all the gaps, they simply couldn't because their midfield wasn't good enough to block the passages of play. Now, Juventus, I would probably say, has one of the less good midfields from the top teams. And yet Allegri hasn't been playing, Locatelli. He's been sort of allowing Arthur to step in and play some games. He's allowed us all to once again watch the awfulness that is Rabiot, sadly. And he's changed up a few things, but Juventus are now a team that, they haven't really lost since the end of November, and they dropped points against Venezia. But in their last 6 matches, including one Champions League game to Malmo, they have won 5 and drawn 1, which isn't too shabby considering they're without Federico Chiesa, they're without Paulo Dybala. They haven't played Locatelli in the recent matches unless he's come on as a substitute. And, they do have, Danilo's out, Giorgio Chiellini's out. I mean, honestly, I think Sandro should be out too for different reasons. But are Juventus slowly creeping up the table, considering Atalanta have been giving up points and they're, 4 points away from a top 4 spot?
Yeah, isn't it fascinating? I was asked this question the other day, Mina, by an interview from the BBC, and they were asking, Juventus are on the way back now, right? Like they're going to be in the top 4 at the end of the season. I said, honestly, I find that very hard to predict for lots of reasons. Form comes and goes. There's also a January transfer window to come, which is probably going to change some things for at least some clubs. I think there's no way this first half of the season, I don't think that the league table missells who has been the best 4 teams in Italy. I don't think the Juventus have been one of the best 4 teams in Italy through 19 games. That's a different question to, is their trajectory going to be good enough to get them in there? And right now, the fact is, as you just said, they've been picking up points. Napoli have been dropping points. Milan have been dropping points. Even Atalanta are dropping points. So there is some reason to start thinking this is the way it's going to go. And Juventus are a lot closer to that top 4 than they were even, 3 or 4 rounds ago. So there has been real progress for them. For me, the jury is still a bit out because a bit like Inter, their fixture list hasn't been the toughest in the last bit. And a bit like Inter, they will come back with a very different reality right away because their first 2 games in the new year are Napoli at home and then Roma away. And then after that, they got Inter in the Coppa Italia as well. So, sorry, not the Coppa Italia, the Super Cup. So there is going to be a very different test of Juventus coming very quickly in the new year. And I think that's going to be...
Can I say something?
Of course you can.
where is it that Juventus have disappointed you? Has it been against Inter and, the big matches, or has it been against the likes of Empoli and
That's a good
the likes of Venezia? So I wonder whether
they've had some good big games, haven't they?
Which is why sometimes I wonder if it is a psychological issue. It is about a lack of motivation. And that was especially noted against Bologna. Just get the second and third goal and be done with the game. But there isn't that desire to go. And really, ever since Sarri came in, I feel like that the team has lost something in that point of view. But when you watch Inter, it's they're never done. They always want to keep going. Juve, when it comes to these big games, they do find the motivation for them. Like against Chelsea, they'll knuckle down and try to get a goal. Obviously, when they went to the bridge, it was a disaster. But sometimes it is against those smaller teams that I feel like they lose something of themselves.
I think that's a really interesting point. They haven't necessarily done amazingly in the big games, but they haven't been awful. They drew with Inter. They got a great result at home to Chelsea in the Champions League. They had one really bad result away to Chelsea, which they somehow came back from and still won the group. And otherwise, they've lost some of the big games. They lost to Napoli, but they didn't have a horrible game against them. They didn't play completely sort of terrible football like they did in some games. It's definitely a mixed review for me if I'm sort of reviewing Allegri's first half of the season. Again, I probably shouldn't do this because now I'm going to start getting in trouble for not doing every team report card. But I sort of look at this and I'm like, what is this first half of the season been from Allegri? Because a few weeks ago, I think it would have been a D, and now it's maybe it's a C, maybe it's even I don't know, maybe it's a C. I think it's not much better than that. I was thinking, is it a C minus? But I think it could be a C. And it's. You
don't think it's more than that at all, considering the team he has and considering what they're up against?
But that the only thing that could bring it up is the Champions League campaign, because frankly, they made it very easy. And yes, it wasn't the toughest group, but still, they made it very easy and they won the group. And that is meaningful, especially when you've got Chelsea in your group. I think there are things that I like. I like, even though I'm not suddenly sort of won around to him being the wonderful player that he seemed to be for the national team. I like that Bernardeschi's involved. I like that Bernardeschi is no longer this completely tossed away asset who's doing nothing for the team. He's a footballer with something to offer. I think that there have been some moments when I've been actually quite, because I've been quite skeptical of Weston McKennie at times. I think there's been some moments where I thought actually there could be seeds of something. There could be something coming through here. Then there's old habits that die hard, I guess, like seeing Juan Cuadrado be Juan Cuadrado for an Allegri team. You thought, God, is this just forever? Cuadrado he's not that old, I guess. He's 33, but he continues to sort of show up and be decisive in times when they need him to be. I mean, there are things I'm disappointed about. I feel like, yes, there's been injuries, but I haven't seen anything like the Federico Chiesa that I felt like was developing so far this season. I think, he had a brilliant summer at the Euros, coming off a strong end last season. And this season, what have we seen from him? Almost nothing. I think the tactics still don't feel to me like there is that moment which you were talking about with Inzaghi of okay, Allegri's found it now. It's sussed. I don't think it's there yet. So there's things I like and things I don't like, which is why I think I tend towards that C area rather than much higher. But you can make a case why I'm wrong.
I mean, I wonder whether it is sort of facing less severe fixtures at the end, the likes of Cagliari and Bologna. I mean, Bologna is certainly not a team that's as disgusting as Cagliari to watch. So, frankly speaking, that whole... And yeah, Cagliari actually could have scored a goal. What irritated me was the post-match comment. I actually put it up on Twitter when Benitez came out and said, well, our president, has been diagnosed with COVID and we wanted to win this game for him. But all the others, we were just not caring, that's how I read it, obviously. But they do have some good players, and it's weird their position now, but I'm not going to discuss them. What I do like, I think, is that there are a few things that have been sussed out, which is that Bentancur is slow. And that, he's tried him playing higher up the pitch. He's tried him sort of in his general centre midfield role. Yesterday, it was a few days ago, it was in front of the defence. And and Arthur was more involved in the actually build-up of the play. I like Bernardeschi is back to being somebody that we can think about. How many assists now in the last 5 games? And he is making the difference. You can see that he's happy. I think that Morata is starting to define some sort of partnership with Moise Kean, in the sense that, Morata hates to play as a central striker, and always bothers me when they play him that way. I think Chelsea showed us that he can't do that. He's always somebody that needs to play off someone, off Ronaldo, off somebody else. And, he doesn't like it when that play he's playing off is a creative one, like João Felix or Paulo Dybala. He prefers a reference point who fights in battles in the way that Moise Kean does. And I do think that there is something to be drawn from there. So there's almost like a plan B. Like, okay, let's say Locatelli's not available. Can we do it with Arthur and Bentancur and Rabiot? Let's see what Rabiot can show us if we play him here. There's been a lot of experimentation. So I do think
I thought you were just going to say there's been a lot of Rabiot, and sometimes there's definitely been too much Rabiot.
Yeah, it really has, right? I mean, they actually applauded when he went off. I feel like there's been a lot of experiments and there's some conclusions that have been drawn, but you're right. I don't think that, they've sussed it out quite yet, because, you watch them against Bologna and you think Bologna are pretty good. They just can't really finalize their opportunities, and that Juve is still a little bit, up and down, and you don't know, and they don't have that desire to fight all the way through. But I do like the attitude of De Ligt and Bonucci. I think that's going to be imperative going forward. And I do think, certain players are starting to maybe remember what it means to play for Juventus. And hopefully that's the kind of thing that passes on. But I do need to state that this isn't a team that's anywhere near as good as what Spalletti has managed with Napoli, or obviously anywhere near Inter, or even right now Milan, who have a certain level of fluency in their play. But their squad means that they should be able to overcome teams like Atalanta and some of their, just with how much has been spent on this team. Obviously, it's all bad investments, and that's why you can never really give them anything more than a C, because you think you're still Juventus, and it's their name still matters. And so it's obviously a shame to see that. But again, Cagliari, 5 players at the back, 3 in midfield, still don't know how to defend.
So let me turn around that question I was mentioning to you before that I had from that BBC journalist, Mina. Do you think Juventus will be in the top 4 at the end of the season?
It's
halfway through
he
now.
asked me that exact question. Yeah, he asked. I got asked the same question, and I said I never know. I never know, because it's about how much we can trust the competitors. Because when you're seeing Napoli drop certain points, and they're going to be without certain players, and when you know that Milan have started seeing the wheels come off, but you think they don't have European competition, it's about who's challenging. So I think Juventus will remain this team that drops points in certain matches that isn't always going to be exciting to watch. But I think they will collect almost the same number of points, maybe 2 or more in the second half of the season. But it's what Napoli and what Milan and Atalanta do that shows me whether or not they can make top 4.
Serie A Chronicles is excited to partner with Kaleido Media, an Australian digital media agency specializing in website design and development and digital marketing.
The Kaleido Media team has a diverse range of digital skills, including helping our podcast by managing its social media accounts and editing videos for YouTube.
Whether you're looking to enhance your website to attract new business or find an audience via social media marketing to generate leads and sales, Kaleido Media will work with you to develop a customized digital strategy for your business.
They've had a lot of success in generating leads and driving online traffic for various types of businesses, including home builders, renovators, and kitchen cabinetry professionals, commercial cleaning, and even tennis coaches.
So if you're looking to attract new eyeballs to your business to generate leads and drive sales, visit kaleidomedia.com.au to get in touch with the team to discuss a strategy to fire up your business, connect with your ideal audience, and communicate your message.
Fire up, connect, and communicate with Kaleido Media. See the link in the show notes. But what do you think of Napoli? As in, are you starting to see my point of view? It was so bizarre because, obviously there is a moment when I actually bet on a clean sheet against Spezia, and I really liked what I saw against Milan. I do we have to discuss the contentious decision because, should Kessie's goal stood and it be a 1-1 draw, what did you think of Napoli's performance in general? And what are we to expect of them going forward, considering the absences?
Yeah, so the Milan-Napoli game, which is probably the biggest game since we last recorded, one of the biggest games of the season for sure, because they were both, these teams after 11 games had both taken all but 2 points. They were joint top of the table and things have gone south for both of them since then. And this was quite a big sort of moment for both of them to sort of reassert their credentials a little bit. And I felt like it was a really sort of flawed performance from both teams. I didn't look at either of them and think, wow, here are title contenders. But I thought that Napoli were the better team. I thought they deserved their win. Yes, it was a slightly sort of, I suppose it was a game shaped by the fact that they did get that early goal, right? And it was just a set piece. It was a well-worked set piece, but it was just a set piece with Elmas scoring at the near post. After that, they just controlled the game enough to not really give Milan a chance. Like, it didn't seem like there was a Milan goal coming until that Kessie strike. I didn't feel like that was at all inevitable. And I thought that Spalletti won the tactical part of it, really. It seemed like both teams wanted to do that slightly more advanced press that they both tend to do. For sure, Napoli were helped by having Anguissa back, because I thought he was really good in that game. But I also felt like the way that Milan approached it, by trying to put the sort of pressure all on those two sort of outside midfields, I guess, for Napoli, at the outside of the three, and really applying it high up the pitch there, they actually let Zielinski operate a bit too much in the space in front of those players. And I think that Zielinski is, at the moment at least, with all the absentees that Napoli have, he's the key to everything. He's really, really had a brilliant season for the most part, and he had too much free reign in that midfield to do what he needed to do. And I felt like Napoli deserved to win the game. Yes, there was this contentious decision at the end with Kessie's goal being disallowed. Honestly, for me, Mina, in the end, it was the right decision. I was watching it a few times. Yeah.
Really?
I think you can have a lot of empathy for Giroud, who isn't trying to do anything. But the whole purpose of that rule is that if an attacker is affecting the play, then they're an active player. And I think that the position that he was in, inevitably, he was affecting the play. I think he was Jesus, whether or not Jesus made it sound like he had Giroud on top of him in his interviews after. It's like, oh, I couldn't get up on top of me. And looking at the pictures, that's sort of harder to stand up. But I think the goalkeeper can't not be affected by the presence of a striker lying that close to the goal, in the middle of the goal, not sort of off to the side of it, literally in front of the goal. To me, it's an active position. I understand why not everyone will agree with that. And I think it's interesting that Marelli, the DAZN sort of in-house analyst, former referee who they have on, said it's an ambiguous situation. So clearly there is scope to go either way on it. But I certainly don't think you can call it a scandal if that is the position of a former referee as well, saying that on TV, having had the chance to sort of stop and review it. The goal was given in normal time, and then it was overturned after a pitch-side review.
So my question is that isn't it supposed to be clear and obvious error? If there are scopes for it to go both ways. That's I think, the best argument against it, for sure. Like, I think if you're asking the question, do I think he's offside? My answer is yes. If you're asking, is it clear and obvious? I can go with you on that, Mina. Like, it's enough of a debate that maybe we should be sticking with the referee's original decision. Although, of course, this is a pitch-side review, so it's not VAR telling the referee you're wrong. It's the referee looking at his own thing. Yeah, but it's him still making the decision. Speaking, yes. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, for a while now, me and Nikki have been agreeing on far too much. And
I know. You're trying to have a fight. I can't fight with you when you're sick, Mina. It's not fair. I'll have to just say yes. I have to say yes to your sick.
I'm just going to guilt you into changing your opinions. But for me, I was like, this is so totally like, for me, I would have been livid if it happened against my team. Like, I I feel like too much happened. Like Giroud fell. Like if he made a run that went laterally, I mean, he would have still dragged Juan Jesus away. Is he off? Like, I don't know. I just feel like you can't. The goalkeeper being distracted. This is football. You're always going to be distracted. Usually people are all over you.
But the ball does come right back to where they are. Like Giroud doesn't touch it, but it comes right back to where they are, and Jesus does touch it. So the ball is really right in that area. It's not like it's unrelated to what's happening.
If you're Giroud and you fell, what would you do? You have to get up really quickly and quickly get back. I just feel like that's too much to ask. Like, because he's lying down. It's not like he's trying to actively, like, I don't know, like, knock his feet about so he destroys Juan Jesus. And I just, and honestly, I feel like karma happened, and that's why it was Jesus who scored the own goal. I don't know, like, because his interview afterwards. Yeah, because the interview afterwards that he gave, God, you would think that Giroud had like flattened him from down below, And I get that he's like a big, tall striker. Believe me, I'm not going to be the one who's going to want to defend against him, but in my head, I'm like, oh, calm down, love, And it was almost sweet justice for me to see that, because I just thought, it's too much of an exact. The law clearly states, like he comes out and is talking about how law clearly states that this is, and I can't help but think the decision for me, because I was outraged with Atalanta as well, and that happened earlier in the day when they played against Roma. And I was outraged with that decision. And frankly speaking, the referee in that game, which we'll talk about later, wasn't even called to do a VAR review.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is somehow, I can't help but think it's affected that. So that they would have two examples and they can turn around and say the decisions were right. I am a conspiracy theorist, possibly. I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. I'm vaxxed, so I don't know how much of a conspiracy theorist I am, but there was, for me, a lot of annoyance. But on the face of it, I thought that perhaps, like, it's not daylight robbery that Napoli got the win, because I thought they managed the game very well. And I liked the way that they sort of, really fought to secure that result. And Anguissa's performance, for me, deserved 3 points, just because he was really fantastic to watch. And I love that Petagna is sort of finding, himself important to the team, and that he's not just somebody that you sort of bring on.
That was a big gamble by Spalletti as well, starting Petagna instead of Mertens. Big gamble that paid off.
Yes, exactly. But I'm interested in the fact that how both teams are really struggling for goals. I mean, both of them only managed two shots on goal. And you think, all right, it's a big match. They don't want to lose. It's going to be a little bit tactical, But for Milan, this has been they only managed one shot against Udinese. Udinese had 6 on target against them. Napoli have now, 1 goal in 3 games. So, we can talk about defensively that there are obviously mistakes there, and they're suffering because Milan has absences, and so do Napoli. Koulibaly, Captain Kayer. I always call him Captain Kayer like he's Captain America, but I understand that. But also going forward, Milan don't seem to really have any ideas. It's kind of like, okay, so what do we do now? And you can really feel the absence of Leao and Rebic. And for Napoli, without Osimhen, they're just not a team that continues to push forward with venom.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's not skim over the absences point, because we're talking about both those teams were literally missing, both of them sort of identically. So at least it was an equal problem, you could say, but both of them missing 5 out of 10 outfield starters. So literally, you're talking about half of their first teams. Now, is it true that if you took out 5 of Inter's starters, I think they'd be better off? Yes. And that's a reality. I think we've agreed pretty strongly that Inter have the best squad depth in this situation. But I think it's reasonable to expect that when you take out 5 starters from a team, and especially we're not talking about the less important starters, when we're talking about Osimhen, Koulibaly, Fabian Ruiz, Lorenzo Insigne at Napoli, when we're talking about, Simon Guerre for Milan and Rafael Leao and Ante Rebic. Now, I think Leao for me is actually the key one
for this match.
Yes, Calabria as well. For me, I think Leao is the key one. I think I sort of was still forming this thought on the last podcast, and I talked to you a bit about it, Mina, saying look, Ibrahimovic is scoring lots of goals, but I'm not certain the team is as good with him in it. And I think that what I'm really sort of coming to even more sharply after this Napoli game is when Leao is there, because he's so quick, and in the first part of the season, he was so on form, and he still has sizzling sort of direct running that I'm excited about. When you are playing as a defense against them, you have two choices. Like, either you've got to sit off a bit deeper and respect that pace, or you take your chances. Like, you come forward and you could risk getting exposed. And I think a great example of that is that game, the first meeting with Liverpool at Anfield, where, look, Liverpool were the better team. They deserved to win. They did win. But Liverpool, having been 1-0 up, in control of the game, because they play how Liverpool play, which is with that higher line, which is with that attempt to press, they did suddenly get exposed very rapidly twice. And a lot of that is to do with Leao can get in behind you. Leao can get in behind you. And I think that when you take that away from Milan, they lose a whole dimension. And Brahim Diaz gives you some of it, but I think even he doesn't give it to you in quite the way that Leao does. And I think that is something that in this game, where actually both teams were trying to press high, made a big difference and allowed Napoli to set where the battles on the pitch got played much more. And I think one thing that was interesting, and we'll see if it becomes any more in this last game of the season against Empoli, is Pioli did change something. He put Frank Kessie into like that number 10 role, and Kessie is not Leao. It's a different thing, but he did bring, it felt like, the center of gravity of the team forward a bit. And maybe that's something they need to do more of. Maybe that's something they need to sort of to do to change how they play.
Okay, well, we're discussing Napoli and obviously we're discussing Milan. So, this is our...
Sorry, we're smashing them together because they played each other.
Yeah, we're going to put them together because they are the closest challengers, obviously, to Inter. They have the highest chances of really being the anti-Inter. But here's the thing that you mentioned, because that was actually going to be my next question. Napoli want to win their way. And if they can't win their way, but they usually have opportunities, like even being able to bring on Lobotka, who is, let's say, better on the ball than, let's say, Demme. They do have, at least when you look at their bench, they have similar players, whereas what Milan has is a lot more versatility, different types of players, right? Mm-hmm. So what I do love about Milan is what they did in playing Kessie. It is about, okay, let's see how we can try to stop Empoli from creating, because they are very good in that diamond shape, and they can produce, creativity in their midfield. Obviously, we've seen Barami and different players like Ricci making the difference. And I feel like putting Kessie there and allowing them that tactical variation and playing with a much more sort of like, this is who we are. We're going to be humble. We're going to try to neutralize the strength of our opponent, even if they are Empoli. We're not going to say, oh, we're Milan and we're going to do what we usually do. We're going to take lessons and we're going to try to correct them. I don't know if Napoli do that. And if you're asking me in between the two, who's more likely to win, I think Napoli has a better squad. I think they have a better identity. I think they play much better football. But I think their ability to change Milan and understand the situation and reduce themselves or inflate themselves depending to what is asked could be the difference. Because against Spezia, do Napoli know how to really light up the different players that they have, or are they always going to try to win the Napoli way?
Yeah, and I mean, look, after that win over Milan, I thought, maybe this is better for sort of competitiveness at the top of the table. I think if you ask me sort of honestly who I think has more potential in their squad, I think it's Napoli. I think when everyone's there, I think their teams are really, really good. And then immediately they lose and they end the year 7 points back of Inter. And you think, is that already too much with this Inter team playing as well as they are? I don't know what to say with that Napoli situation that slightly hasn't already been said, in as much as, Osimhen, yes, you're missing him desperately. I can't wait to see him back. He's a wonderful footballer. And then you sort of see he's starting to get back in training with his sort of protective headgear. And then he's got a social media post about being ready for the Africa Cup of Nations. And you think everyone in Naples must be tearing their hair out saying, no, like you need to sort of stay here now and be ready for us, but you might not. And again, if you lose him, if you lose Anguissa, who's just back, if you aren't going to get Koulibaly back, if you aren't going to have these players, I think it's my faith in this team fades a lot. They still have some brilliant talent there. And I do think Zielinski has honestly been one of my top players in Serie A this season. I think he's been, even by his levels, hitting new ones. But there's too much in this team that is intermittent or inconsistent. I mean, it's just bad. We've talked lots about this season. My perception, I don't know if you share it, but certainly my perception that there's a really vast gap between the very bottom teams in Serie A this season and even the ones in the middle. Like, your Salernitanas, your Cagliaris, your Genoas have been so far off the pace. And Spezia were in that group. Like, you have to beat Spezia at home. You just do, even without players that you're missing. They
won.
Have
a shot. Spezia didn't have a shot. I mean, they scored the goal without a shot because it's an own goal, obviously. But it's amazing that you couldn't score against that defense, Right.
And you still have on the pitch Irving Lozano. You still have Dries Mertens. You still have Politano. You're not sending out, Franco from the academy. You're sending out quality international footballers. You should be able to win this game. And look, maybe they'll come back strong in the new year and we'll chalk this one down to fatigue. But it's a really ugly way to end the year after what could have been a real turning point win over Milan, it felt like.
Also, I mean, Spezia did this to them last season, right? They won the match. But you thought at the time if they had Vincenzo Italiano and Napoli were like, making a few mistakes under Gattuso, and then playing out from the back. So you sort of understand. But this Napoli, you think, I know you're missing big players, but it's not like Spezia have, a world of talent there. But it does scare me. But the good news is that they're going to sue the African Cup of Nations so that they don't lose their players. Or at least that's the news that's coming out. And they're still going ahead about suing the players that were part of the mutiny when Carlo Ancelotti was in charge, that refused to come back to the training retreats.
Sue everybody.
Maximovic. Yeah, exactly. So they are desperate to not lose Osterman and Anguissa and obviously Koulibaly in the African Cup of Nations. So they're going to try every legal route to make sure that they stay there. But it is what it is. I mean, it is... I just want to see how capable and viable they are in the sense of, changing their tactics, changing their mentalities, accepting where the problems are, and really sort of saying, okay, like, in this game, we're going to have to do this. And in this match, we can play our way because that's actually going to work. And it's that lack of variety that Napoli sometimes have. And because they have such a strong tactical identity, which is usually what we've been taught is a great thing, like Pep and Manchester City. But I do think sometimes it stops leadership from really growing and blossoming. And maybe because Osimhen and Anguissa don't have that yet, into their bones, that they're not yet soldiers of a particular identity, they still have their personality coming through. And that's why their personality right now, I think, is the one that makes the difference for me. Obviously, I think we've talked about some of the, the biggest teams and the challenge for top four, and the other team that was doing very well was Atalanta, until I felt like a very unfair decision. But despite the unfair decision, Roma deserved to beat Atalanta, and I guess we should talk about those clubs a little bit because I mean, frankly speaking, you said there's a vast difference between those at the very bottom and those that sort of come in between. So for me, to see Atalanta not manage anything against Genoa that I just think are hideous, and I actually put a bet on them scoring 3 goals, I was really shocked.
Yeah, there's some things that have happened in this last part of the season that I can't explain. There's been so much football that I can't watch 90 minutes every game. I didn't catch 90 minutes of Genoa against Atalanta. I'm very surprised by the outcome. I was very disappointed by Atalanta against Roma. I felt like they walked right into Jose Mourinho's traps and got exposed horribly. And he did a great job. And Tammy Abraham did a brilliant job of exploiting those sort of weaknesses in the defense that we know are there. But Genoa is, again, it's a game you have to win. And to draw it is really disappointing coming off that result. And, it's not that long ago that we were talking about, could this team be a title contender? And that seems like a sort of whole crazy idea.
I mean, I think this is the weird thing that obviously, this is a really unpredictable league, but Atalanta have only won one of their last 4 games. But they are actually capable of some bizarre results, like the Udinese 1-1 when they were still under Gotti, the Bologna 0-0. And I wonder whether the game against Roma, and the way that Roma defended that, leaving really no space, and you felt like they were just battling and battling and battling. They were exhausted,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one thing that plays into their tactics. I do think they play very exhaustive tactics. I do think that if you crowd them out, they don't necessarily make the most of shots from outside the box. And Genoa, they're just hideous. I mean, really, honestly, I really do love like Shevchenko, but he is the guy that's going to score the goals for them. Otherwise, hopefully, Destro. But they're not really a team that you should really be scared of. And on top of it, they had 50% passing accuracy. I mean, this is a team that had hardly anything of the ball, that wasn't even passing it correctly most of the time, a lot of the time, sorry, not most of the time. But I wonder whether Atalanta and their exhaustive tactics and they are going to play now in the Europa League, and if that's going to have an impact on them or not going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a disappointing end to the year for them. I think the Europa League, as we've talked about before, certainly has got there's a proven link between playing Thursday nights and Sunday nights, and that negatively impacting your performances. And look, we can sort of say it over and over again. This team has got a great deal of underachievement under its belt. When you go realistically through their resources and compare them to teams they're up against, they should be outside that top 4. They continue to sort of defy gravity on that front. And I think Gasperini is actually, interestingly, one of the managers who might get something that he wants in the January transfer window, because the club has got so much faith in him. He has achieved that position of such authority at the club. And I know they were looking at Sassuolo's Jeremy Boga, who hasn't had the greatest season, but really feels like he fits into that mold of player who finds his magic again at Atalanta, because he is absolutely that player who does what Gasperini wants to, who embraces the one-on-ones, who will take on an opponent and try to go somewhere with it. So I think if that were to come off, that could be a really interesting transfer. But look, who knows? We have this the winter break now. Maybe a team, again, like you said, that plays such an exhaustive style of football just needs to go and stop now for a week. And it is really only not even a week, probably the player's going to get before they have to start getting back on it. But take that week or so and recharge the batteries and come back in the new year and start up again.
What about Roma? I mean, they managed this beautiful performance that I think, sort of played. I was interested to see that Atalanta could be stopped in that manner as a blueprint. And I think that, Genoa took some notes from that match, which was clever. But they are a team that managed this beautiful win. Tammy Abraham works so well when he's playing with a player alongside him. And Zaniolo is in tremendous form at the moment. My issue with them is that, those attacking patterns of play. But despite the fact that they are without Pellegrini, they are managing to create their scoring. So, well done. They managed to secure the back line as much as they could. And then I just feel like they threw it all away with a 1-1 draw against Sampdoria. And, Tammy went off with an injury. And do this team have a real chance for sort of trying to get into a top 4? I mean, you spoke to us how after 19 months you managed a big win and against Atalanta. And then well, what's the point of a big win if you can't beat Sampdoria that, frankly, you really only have Gabbiadini and Candreva to really watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, well, I agree with Jose. It wasn't a particularly exciting game of football. And I thought that Roma were the better of the two teams against Sampdoria, although, funnily enough, Sam did hit the woodwork a couple of times. But
yeah,
it was just not a very compelling game, and it sort of makes you think, well, is what you did against Atalanta more evidence that you've got, sure, some old Jose Mourinho tricks up your sleeve? You know how to counter an opponent who wants to play open football, who will give you those chances to be cynical and exploit what they do. But when a team comes to you without much ambition like Sampdoria, that isn't going to play a nice open game for you and give you those chances, do I think you've got plans that can counter that? And for me, I'm still pretty skeptical this team's going to make the top four. I feel like we really hammered Jose in the last podcast, and he came back with this great win over Atalanta. I know I got some kickback on social media, and you know what? Fair enough. It was a great performance against Atalanta, but yeah, like you said, Mina, it has to be more than that. And I think people have a wrong impression of how I feel about Mourinho as well, by the way.
Yeah, you love him. So
I don't dislike Mourinho. In fact, actually, what you were just talking about, his sort of post-match stuff against Atalanta, I found it hilarious. That whole, we hadn't beaten a big team for 19 months, and now we haven't beaten a big team for, checks his watch, 20 minutes. And you think, I love it. I love it. I love that from Jose when he's doing that. He's dramatic and he's fun. But you need to be able to back it up with more than a one-off performance. And no, in this first half of the season, I haven't seen anything like enough from Roma to think that they belong in that top four.
Yes, but I do remember you're very excited when Mourinho got the job. Now, I'm not very excited about Maurizio Sarri, but he did get the win against Venezia. There have been sort of rumours that he's not getting along with Milinkovic-Savic. There were obviously rumours at the start of the season he wasn't getting along with Luis Alberto. They haven't had Ciro Immobile, but they are winning games. So are they finding their groove?
Yeah, I mean, they're 3 points behind Juventus, who are in fifth. So you look at the table and you see them in eighth and you think, oh, well, it's not been great, but then they're not separated from that pack. So they have the opportunity to pull themselves back into it. And as we've talked about previously this season, it's interesting because they've sort of kept themselves, I guess, attached to that pack by often beating the teams in that pack. Their head-to-heads have been very good. And perhaps these games, like the one against Venezia, have been the ones where they've tended to come unstuck a little bit. So it was sort of encouraging, I suppose, to see that in a game where they were sort of 1-1 at half time, where it felt like maybe the momentum was with Venezia a little bit, who have been quite hard to beat at home, at least, that they went through the gears and got the win. But I mean, there's a lot of I don't knows this season, Mina. There's a lot of I don't knows this podcast, and I don't know with Maurizio Sarri. He's an enigma, and his persona at Lazio has seemed at times like this perfect fit there, going under the curva and having the eagle on his arm after winning the derby, and you think, oh my goodness, he's loving it and they're loving him, and he's this sort of underdog outsider with his cigarettes, and then there's been some rubbish football, and then there's been patches of really nice football. I have no idea. I will say, we have said often in the past with Sarri, it was the thing that got touted a lot at Juventus at the beginning, was he's a manager who needs his time. You have to give him time. You have to let him get his ideas in. Well, if that's true, then maybe the second half of the season we'll see more from them, but we'll find out.
Absolutely. I think there are a few enigmas. Fiorentina, Sassuolo, good enough, but I'm not good enough to battle out in the middle. Both have interesting strikers, Vlahovic, Scamacca, and also the players that play alongside them, obviously Raspadori, Gonzalez for Fiorentina, really interesting teams, but sometimes their form can be baffling to say the least. But I think that's all I can give you for this hour before I might just pass out.
Yes. Oh, Mina, you have been an absolute trooper. Everyone is in awe of you. I know I am, sticking it through and giving us a brilliant episode to end the year. Everyone at home, if you're listening, this is the point at which you say out loud to anyone who's near you and isn't listening to the podcast, yes, it has been brilliant. Guys, we're done for 2021, except for a Q&A podcast that we've got coming up in between Christmas and New Year. I'm going to peel back the curtain here and tell you that we're actually recording that today, but we're going to get that to you in the gap between Christmas and New Year. So you've got some time to you've got some podcasts to tide you over. I think our producer Simon is also preparing a little highlights package of our best of this first half of season run, which will pop into your podcast inbox in the new year as well. So lots of content still to come from us. But yes, obviously, normally the podcast would be out on a Tuesday. This podcast will have hopefully got to you on a Friday. The Q&A is going to come on Tuesday, because we're working around this Christmas schedule. So the next episode after this one is Tuesday with our Q&A. We will be back with the regularly scheduled podcast on the 11th of January. So after the first round, well, it's 2 rounds actually to begin the new year, because they've got 2 rounds scheduled really close together. We're going to have a little winter break, Mina and I, which I think we both need a little bit. It's been a very, very hectic end to the year. But we're going to be back on the 11th of January to talk about those first 2 rounds of the year, which we've got some huge, huge games. And then we've got Milan, Roma, Juve, Napoli, Roma, Juve, and Inter Lazio. So do come back for us then. Thank you so much, by the way, everyone who is listening to this, for coming with us on this journey with a brand new podcast that we launched. Not even at the beginning of the season. We sort of had to do it a bit on the fly and come into it after the season had begun. And the reception to it has been so positive. We've loved your emails. We've loved your support. We've been so grateful for you all for downloading and being part of it. So thank you. And we've got lots of exciting plans for the new year, and we can't hope to have you come back with us in the new year when that happens. In the meantime, do keep getting your questions into us for the Q&A podcast on Twitter at Serie A Chron pod with the hashtag Chronicles Q&A. Find us on Twitter. Mina is at Mina Rizuki. I'm at Nikki Bandini. Subscribe to the Serie A Chronicles YouTube channel for clips of the show. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And for now, Buon Natale. Have a wonderful new year. I hope you have all the panettone and pandoro that you could wish for, and that you will send your best positive healing vibes to Mina. And we'll see you in the new year.
Ciao. God, that was like a 20-minute ending.
Sorry, I talked too much. It was heartfelt. Heartfelt.
Bukayo Saka per andare a oltranza. Abbracciami,
che ci fa vincere, grazie, siamo campioni d'Europa, Italia, campioni d'Europa, grazie che esiste lo sport, che ci fa abbracciare e che ci fa piangere, grazie per queste lacrime, come disse un mio collega, con i gol di Maradona, che ci fanno tornare alla vita. Grazie signore, siamo campioni d'Europa, grazie ragazzi, ve lo siete meritato, siete i nostri eroi moderni, ve lo siete meritato, siamo venuti senza paura a Wembley a giocarci l'Europeo e a vincerlo, grazie Mancio, ci hai dato delle lezioni, ti amo Gianluca. Sei un fratello e te lo meriti. Presidente, io lo so che è un'istituzione e che non può lasciarsi troppo andare, ma si allarghi questo sorriso, Presidente.
Fabio, 11 luglio, questa data qua è la data degli italiani.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.